Hello everybody and welcome to my garden. This is Sebastian from LUNA and today I want to make a little update on a video I made maybe 1 year ago, providing you with some background information about the LUNA Handpan, my thoughts behind building this, and especially for persons who are interested in a handpan or buying a handpan and are just overwhelmed by the amount of offerings and probably makers, especially for those type of persons, to give you as much and as clear background information from my side, from the LUNA, for you to help you to decide whether the LUNAs might be an interesting instrument for you or maybe not. So with that said, let's dive into it. So, what makes the LUNA different from other instruments, or why to buy a LUNA? Well, I cannot answer you why to buy a LUNA, but I can answer you the first question: what makes the LUNA different from most other instruments? So, I think the LUNA has maybe 4 or 5 different. Please excuse my English. English is not my mother language, but I give my best to. I try my best to make communication as clear and solid as possible. So the LUNA, I think, has 4 or 5 different points that made it very different from the typical type of handpan that's mostly out there. That's not to be understood as a judgment or not to be understood as good or a bad thing. It's just what it is. It's a difference. So first, the LUNA is built on stainless steel, which is, by the way, it was never built from other materials, except for raw steel. There was a period when I built the instrument in an early time, which was raw steel. But the most common material handpans are built these days is nitrided steel, which is alloy typical use. The typical alloy is usually DCO4, which is a cold forming steel. It's also used in the automobile industry, and the alloy itself is not hard enough. So after the manufacturing of the shell, usually the material is hardened via nitriding, which is a gas treatment with ammonium gas, through which the steel becomes hard. So the typical handpan instrument is built from nitrided steel, which has certain sorry, I like the word, which has certain properties, that's the word. And I would say the most general property is for nitrided steel. It has a little bit more warm and a soft tone and less sustain. That, however, is to be taken with a grain of salt, because I know makers, and there are a lot of good makers, handpan makers out there, which builds nitrided steel instruments and very high quality and very good. So again, it's not to be taken as a judgment. But in general, you can say, oh, and I know makers who work with nitrided steel and also can achieve a quite long sustain. So it has to be taken with a grain of salt. But in general, you can say the stainless steel has a longer sustain than nitrided steel instrument. It has a longer, the instrument sounds for a longer time. And it has a little bit of more crystalline, clear timbre, cold timbre, compared to the nitrided steel. So, first, the material. I have a second model here. I will come on this later. This is not a steel instrument. This is a copper, a brass alloy. And it's quite a new thing for the handpan world, for the handpan community. I built these since not a year, and I really love the sound, but I will come on this material later, because it's quite a different thing. So none of the LUNA handpans are built from nitrided steel. That's the first difference. The second difference is the shell. The Luna is built from my own manufactured shells, which are which are my own design. So since the beginning, I wanted to make the Luna my kind of handpan. I wanted to be my instrument, so I wanted to pour personality and individuality into this building process. Now, many makers these days build their instruments from pre-manufactured shells, such, for example, as Ayasa shells, which, again, is not a bad thing. Ayasa offers one of the most quality shells and the best quality handpan shells to build instruments from. But it was not an option for me because I wanted to have an individual instrument, and for me that starts with the shell. So with the shell geometry, with the shell measurements, and all of these things. So the Luna is, if you take a close look, you will notice the Luna has a much flatter geometry than most handpans out there. Most handpans have more of a bulbous, sphere-like geometry, which goes hand in hand kind of with the tuning process. So almost every point I tell you here is interconnected with each other. So my tuning process, I will come on this soon, influenced the shell and vice versa. So it's all connected. Yeah, so the shell is more flatter than other instruments. The small measurement of the small models, which I call the new moon model, is 52 centimeters in diameter, which is quite the common measurement for handpans. And this one is the bigger instruments. I call them the full moon models, and they have 60 centimeter, which is quite big for the handpan world and this kind of instrument. So that was the second point. The third point that makes the Luna different from most other handpans out there, not from every handpan, because there are some makers who also have this kind of tuning approach, but most don't. Most makers have another kind of tuning approach. So the tuning, I think, is the third main reason that makes the Luna different. If you take a close look, you will notice that the Luna has not a sharp, distinct edge around the tone fields. So, in fact, I call this tuning the soft border tuning. There are discussions whether this term is accurate or not, because or borderless tuning, that was the term that was discussed. Of course, there are borders, but the overall shaping of the tone fields is very soft and very gentle. Now there are several reasons why I do this. The first reason for me is the sound, because the Luna is not and was never meant to be played percussively. I am not a percussionist. I have no background in percussion, which is the case for most handpan players, professional handpan players who have a percussion background. I don't have this. I lack a percussion background. So, in fact, my first instrument I played for myself was the guzheng, which is a Chinese harp. So I always had the more melodic approach to this instrument, which is what I poured into the building process of the Luna. So the Luna was never meant to be played percussively, but to be played more melodic focused. So the tuning, the soft border tuning, is in fact, I think, I don't know if it's a result of this thought process, but it supports it, because with the soft borders, the Luna is a much more sensitive instrument. There are some differences from the models. I will come on this later. This one is much stronger material and can take quite a strong hitting, while the stainless steel instruments are not meant to be played like a drum. So the soft border has mainly the benefit from me that it makes the instrument more sensitive to soft hits. Like there is no strong force needed to make the instrument sound. It also comes a little bit with the material, and you can say that the typical nitrided steel with the sharp borders need a little bit more impact to make the instrument sound at all. It's not a good thing or bad thing per se, but you can say that the stronger you can hit the instrument, for example for percussive playing techniques where you give it quite strong and have a fast and strong playing, the more you have this kind of instrument, the more force you need to make it sound at all. While the LUNA is built in a very low spectrum, so it can be it can be striked with a quite low force and should not be striked with a quite high force. So maybe to show what I mean is I really don't need to hit very much to make the instrument sound. And I found this is supported by the soft border tuning. The second reason for the soft border tuning is that the LUNA is, as it is focused as on a melodic instrument, melodic type of handpan, it also is focused a lot on the overtones. So the LUNA has a very rich overtone timbre, and the overtones are quite strong compared to some other instruments out there. So again, it's a liking thing. Some people really like a very clean and kind of focused and sharp tone, while the LUNA has a lot of overtones singing within the tone. And you can access these overtones without muting the fundamental tone. So typically when you see handpan players playing the overtones, they do something like this. Like they mute the tone field with the one hand. They mute, for example, the x-axis or the y-axis, and they strike on the overtone they want to bring out. So in this case the fifth. Well, with the LUNA and the soft border tuning, that's not necessary anymore. If I hit the right point, I can play the overtone without muting the other tone or the fundamental. So this sounds quite the same like this. For me personally, that's a benefit because I am the melodic type of player and because I built the LUNA only in this layout with a central note and 8 notes around. I don't do mutants, I don't do tones on the bottom tones. There have been experiments with this. I tried this kind of stuff, and I don't want to talk it bad. There are very good makers who do this kind of stuff and achieve great results. For me, the LUNA is also the try to make to combine aesthetic with practical playability. So the aesthetics have always been a quite big point for me in building the LUNA, and I just can't help. I don't find it aesthetically pleasant to have mutant tones or and I don't like to reach down for the bottom notes, so I don't do this kind of stuff anymore. The LUNA is just built and built in this kind of layout. one central note and 8 notes around. For me personally, that's kind of the highest point of the balance between aesthetics and it's quite of the summit of elegance. So, but that's a personal point of view. Where have I been? Yeah, with the overtonal playing. So without muting the other overtones, or without the necessity to mute those overtones, give myself a little bit more room here, so I can maybe show you this a little bit better. I can play the overtones without muting, so I have more playing abilities. I can make shifts in the tonal structure. Like, I hit the fundamental places now, and now I switch to the fifth places. And again the fundamental. And the octave. So that gives me a little bit more freedom of movement with the hands. And I guess it's, as I said, it's all interconnected. So my personal playing style, my approach to the instrument, the more melodic type of approach, resolved in this kind of tuning and this kind of material. It all plays together. So, third point. What was the fourth point? Let me think for a minute. Yeah, of course, the surface. So this particular instrument is not urushi lacquered. This one is polished, as you can see it here. And so I offer the LUNA in well, mainly two different kinds. The bigger ones, I will come on this later, and the smaller ones. And the smaller ones are the models that can be lacquered with urushi. Urushi is a Japanese lacquer technique. It's the sap of a tree. It's the sap of the Japanese lacquer tree. And I will have some information about this in the homepage. You can read it up there. I want to make this video a little bit shorter than the last video. I think the last one took about 1 hour almost, so I try to compress things a little bit more. So the lacquering is available only for the small instruments, for the stainless instruments. The reason for this is this alloy has a chemical part which causes the lacquer to oxidieren. It reacts with the lacquer, and the result is a pure and very deep black. So colors or the transparency of the lacquer is totally lost. So I don't lacquer these big instruments. These bigger instruments are quite resistant by themselves for corrosion and stuff like that. So I only lacquer the small instruments. The lacquer is to be taken as mainly an aesthetical addition to the instruments. It's not necessary by itself. It has some positive benefits on the corrosion resistance, on the especially when it comes to salt water. Salty waters such as seawater or the hand sweat. Salt water is quite aggressive also for stainless steel. So there is a possibility that if maybe you live next to the sea or the ocean, or you want to, I don't know, you have a very sweaty hands when you play, the lacquering gives additional protection to the instrument. It has no, or maybe almost no impact on the sound. The impact on the sound is in fact so small and so little you can barely detect it with a very good tuning device. So it has a little bit of a more organic feeling to it, a softer feeling than the bare steel, and again is mainly a question of personal liking. The lacquering is available in different colors. If you're interested in that, please contact me. And yeah, and the second way the Luna is offered is like this, in a polished smooth surface. And oh yeah, the engravings are on all of my Lunas, and I'm quite open in experimenting with the engraving and in finding new how do you say new designs or new paintings I can engrave. I do them by myself. All of my engravings are drawn by myself, so I don't take them from the internet or from third parties. So if you're interested in a special engraving, just let me know. I'm always keen to try and design something new. The engraving will not be as clearly visible and as strongly visible in the with the lacquered version, because the lacquering is applied on top of the engraving, which means the engraving shimmers through the layer of lacquer, and you can see it, but it's not as strong and popping like the non-lacquered versions. So, said this all, I think now it's time for me to lose some words on this kind of models, the full moon models. Maybe just as a small to add up things again in the end. What are the difference? The Luna is meant to be played as a melodic type of instrument. If you're more the percussive player, the strong player, I would recommend you to look for a nitrided steel instruments. There are several makers, good friends of mine, who work with nitrided steel, and I would love to recommend you to them if you're that type of player. If you're a very melodic player, and if you like a more I would say a more soft, or maybe you can also use the word feminine, a more feminine type of handpan, then maybe the Luna would be the instrument for you. The main things that makes it different from other instruments: the material, it's stainless steel material or brass material, the tuning with soft borders, no sharp edges, and no sharp definement of the tones. So the Luna general spoken is an instrument that talks a lot with itself. If this is happening in a bad or interfering type, people call it crosstalk. I personally call it resonance. So the instrument resonates a lot with itself. That's also because of the soft tuning. So, material, tuning, the own manufactured shells and the own shell design, and the surface. I think that are the points that make the Luna different from other instruments. Oh, and I forgot a very important thing, of course. The tuning. That might be the fifth point. But not the tuning, how it is tuned, but the notes, in which scales it is tuned. So the Luna is by now only tuned in specific Luna scales. I don't tune scales on a request. For example, Anaziska is a scale that is quite frequently requested, stuff like that. I don't do this anymore. So the Luna is only offered in the Luna scales, which you can find on my homepage. The scales are named in mythological and ancient goddesses' names, which is a personal interest of mine. and you can say it's kind of an arbitrary way to name the scales. Somebody else would maybe associate something completely different with that sound, but those are my personal associations I have with the sounds. And I use this also as a tool for people who have no musical or music theoretical background. Like people cannot decide if they want to buy when people cannot decide which scale they want, which scale they feel they want to have. It is of no help if I tell them this is an A minor, this is Aeolian minor, this is a Phrygian minor, or this is harmonic minor, or this is whatever, what else, Ionian, Lydian mode. People cannot connect with that naming. And also that is a feeling I personally have also for the typical handpan names, like for example the Kurd. I have no information with this name. I mean, it gives me no information about the scale from a non-music theoretical background, and not even from a music theoretical background. So I decided to develop my own LUNA scales, which fit exactly my tuning approach and my tuning material. So as I said, it's all connected. There are several notes which are not tunable very clearly on certain shell diameters, for example. Mostly for most makers this comes to the B4, which is a note which will always have a small irregularity, a small unclear, unstable feeling to it. And that's not because the maker is not able to tune it, but it's just not possible to tune that note perfectly on a certain shell size. So taking all this into account, I decided to sort out my scales and only tune LUNA scales which I know I can tune very clearly and very smooth on my material. So set this again to the naming. The Anasiska, for example, also gives no information about the scale, and that's one reason why I decided to connect this with my personal associations I have to the scales and my personal interest in mythology and especially female goddesses of ancient cultures. And the Artemis, for example, which is this one, gives me some kind of image to connect with. The Artemis as the goddess of the moon, as the goddess of the hunt, as the goddess of wilderness, the woods, the forests, evokes some kind of image I can connect with, and I can give people who have no music theoretical background this image. Well, you have to take it with a grain of salt, and as I said, somebody else might associate total different things with that sound. But that's my personal association, and the LUNA is a personal instrument, so I'm fine with this imperfect way. Whereas, for example, this one, which is the Lilith, which is a very different mythological character, which has a lot of individuality and the strive for freedom in her history. Or for example the Eos, which is another handpan, another goddess, and the handpan scale I named after this goddess, which is a major pentatonic scale. And the Eos is as the goddess of the Greek goddess of the first light in the morning. It's a very beautiful and very harmonic and very shining type of personality, and I personally associate the very shining scale of the Eos with that kind of personality. So I don't want to go into all of my scales here. You can look them up on my homepage just for you as an information Why does this guy use these strange names for the handpans? Well, now you know why. So, the day is coming to an end. I have to hurry up, but I want to give you a short impression to finish this this long talk about my instruments with this example of the stainless steel, the new moon model Artemis. So. Now to finish this talk, I would like to present you maybe in direct comparison to the sound of the small new moon model. This is the full moon model, which is, as I said, a brass material, not a stainless steel, not a steel instrument anymore, which is very new for the handpan as an instrument. And which is what I poured my development into, and the research of this sound especially. It's very interesting for me. So, maybe in direct comparison I will give you a short impression about the sound, which is more gong-like and much deeper than the stainless steel. So, as you can hear, this is a very different timbre, and I think it has moved quite far from the typical handpan instrument. The stainless steel already was a step away from the typical handpan instrument sound, and I think it's fair to say that this brass instruments moved another step out of this handpan sound zone. So again, it's a matter of taste whether you like this sound or you don't like this sound. I personally enjoy it very much. For me, it's very deep, and it kind of yeah. I don't find the right words. It resonates quite well. So. Maybe to sum it also, to come to a conclusion also for this instrument. So these are also my own shells. It's not a stainless steel, not a steel material. It's brass alloy. The tuning is quite the same approach. You can also see that there are no sharp distinct borders. The tunings are much deeper. For example, here we have an F2 and a C3, which is the C3, the first note here, is not as deep. No, the other way around. It's deeper than the central note of the small instrument. So these tunings are very deep. The material has a very interesting property, which is its reaction to work hardening. So it is a very strong work hardening material. It's not treated with fire like this material. It's hardened only through work, only through deformation, and that makes it a quite strong material. So this kind of material much stronger than the stainless steel without risking detuning the instrument. However, I would not recommend to do it because it doesn't sound that well. I mean, it's not necessary for a good sound. What else to say? It's a very resistant material also in terms of oxidation. How do you say? Corrosion, a rust resistant material. So the lacquering is not necessary for this instrument. And of course it can also be engraved like the other instrument. This one is not engraved, it has only the logo engraved. Maybe you can see it here. We are heading towards the night, which is a perfect time for the Luna, but not a perfect time for recording, as it will get very dark. So it can also be engraved. However, the engraving on this material is not in a that strong contrast like I can achieve with the stainless steel. So the contrast in this with this material will be a little more supple, will be a little bit more soft. Yeah. Okay, so now I think I have covered all, if not, I hope the most important topics. The most important points I wanted to bring you. Yeah, if you're interested in purchasing a handpan, and especially in purchasing a Luna, of course, please contact me. If you're interested in a recommendation for another type of handpan or for the more typical handpan sound, that's totally fine. You can also contact me, and I would love to recommend you to fellow makers, makers I know who do a very good job and put a lot of effort and energy into building their instruments, and it's not a problem. I will like to recommend you to them and maybe to give you the connection to those makers. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this little information talk. The atmosphere outside here in the garden. Oh no, by the way, I don't know if you can see this, but that was not planned. It was not. I didn't know this, but there is the moon rising up behind the forest. I don't know if you can see it on the video. It looks beautiful because it comes through the clouds, and she has a very big glow around her today. Anyway, that is a nice point to finish this video for the LUNA Handpan, and yeah, I wish you all the best. If you're interested or have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me, to contact me. And with that said, I wish you a good time. Take care.